the cloth does indeed date back to the time of Christ, and with artificial intelligence having something to say about the shroud as well.
At exactly 3:17 in the morning, a neural network buried deep inside a European supercomputer stopped scanning. Its internal signal froze on a section of ancient fabric less than 2 inches wide. What it found wasn't a stain or a tear, or even an image of a face. What it found was symmetry, but not the kind we understand from art or design. This was mathematical, harmonic, invisible to the eye, and buried beneath centuries of linen.
It is also a day that puts a widely debated religious icon in the spotlight, the Shroud of Turin, which some believe to be the actual burial cloth.
It repeated itself with the precision of a code, a pattern that no medieval hand could ever produce. This was not decoration. It was a signature of something else, something far more unsettling. And now that AI has found it, the mystery of the Shroud of Turin isn't whether it's real, it's whether we were ever meant to see what's hidden inside it. Because what this cloth holds isn't just a ghost of a man, it's something encoded, something ancient, something that doesn't behave like art or miracle or artifact, but something that might not even be human. That's why scientists aren't calling it a forgery anymore. They're calling it an anomaly, a riddle that now stares back at us through the eyes of artificial intelligence. What happens when a machine with no soul looks at something people once thought was divine? What does it see? What does it recognize? And what if it recognizes us? Before we dive into the impossible story AI just unlocked from the Shroud of Turin, here's a question for you. If a machine found a code hidden in ancient cloth, a code that forms impossible patterns, geometric sequences, even ancient letters, would you want to know what it says? Or would you rather leave it buried, a whisper meant for another time? The Shroud of Turin has baffled everyone for centuries. Believers see it as sacred proof. Skeptics see it as an elaborate hoax. But when artificial intelligence was finally pointed at it, something happened that no one could explain. This wasn't just another debate about faith. It wasn't another test of carbon or thread count or pigment. This was something else entirely. Because AI doesn't believe, and it doesn't lie. It calculates. And when it calculated the image on the cloth, it didn't see art. It saw data. The cloth is just over 14 feet long and 3 feet wide. A weathered piece of herringbone linen that's held in a bulletproof glass case in Turin, Italy. It bears the faint imprint of a man's body, front and back, arms crossed, hair parted, blood-like stains on wrists, feet, and side butt. What makes it more than just a relic is the image itself. It isn't painted, it isn't dyed, it doesn't soak through the cloth, and under microscope, it barely penetrates the topmost fibers, about 200 nanometers deep, thinner than a single bacteria. That's not how paint works. That's not how anything works. In 1898, a lawyer named Secundo Pia took the first photographic negative of the cloth, and what developed shocked the world. A clear, luminous face appeared, not in the photo, but in the negative. The image on the shroud was already a negative itself, a photographic reversal centuries before photography even existed. From that moment, it refused to be ordinary. Over the next 100 years, every attempt to reproduce the image failed. Heat didn't work. Acid didn't work. Radiation didn't work. Nothing matched its microscopic precision or its strange behavior with light. Because here's where the image becomes something more. When researchers analyzed it using a VP8 image analyzer, technology developed by NASA for mapping planetary surfaces, they discovered that the brightness of the image actually correlates with distance. The nose appears darker because it's closer, the cheeks lighter because they're farther away. This is impossible in art. Paint doesn't behave like that. Light doesn't behave like that. But data does. It's a three-dimensional relief map embedded in linen. That would already be strange enough. But the real twist didn't come until AI got involved. That's when the image stopped being just a face and started revealing something deeper, stranger, and far more structured. Because the Shroud of Turin isn't just an image anymore. It's a data set, and what's buried inside it might be the first record moment when light matter, and consciousness all touched at once. When scientists scanned the shroud with ultra-high-resolution digital cameras, they didn't just take pictures, they created a matrix, billions of pixels cross-referenced by location, tone, and brightness, and then they gave it to the AI. It wasn't told what to look for. It wasn't trained on religion or art history or belief. It was simply given the task to search for order. And what it found was a structure, not a picture, but a network of ratios, curves, and symmetries, patterns that obeyed rules no artist could replicate, the kind of structure you'd expect to find in engineered systems, not medieval fabric. Imagine finding a chessboard pattern hidden in a storm cloud, or musical harmony encoded in stone. That's what this was, but deeper, across the face, the hands, the chest. The image revealed alignments that followed a strange but unmistakable geometry. Distances between key features corresponded to harmonic ratios, the kind you see in sound waves or ancient architecture. This isn't a coincidence. It's scaffolding, invisible until seen through the lens of machine logic. And it wasn't just geometry, it was behavior. Because when the AI ran its analysis, it found that the brightness levels across the cloth didn't fluctuate randomly. They followed a consistent rule, a physical law that maps intensity to depth, as if the image wasn't created by pigment or contact, but by something that emitted from source, energy, radiation, something else entirely, and left a measurable imprint on the linen. One physicist described it like this: the closer the cloth was to a surface, the darker the signal. The farther away, the lighter it became. Not an illusion of depth, but depth itself, translated into light. That doesn't happen in nature, and it doesn't happen in forgery. But it's exactly what AI confirmed. Which brings us to the dating problem. Back in 1988, 3 of the world's top labs, Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona, ran radiocarbon tests on a small sample of the cloth. They concluded it dated between 1260 and 1390 AD. Medieval. Case closed. But then something strange happened. The more people studied the cloth, the more they realized the tested section wasn't part of the original linen. It was a patch, sewn on centuries after a fire in 1532 damaged part of the relic. Under microscope, the tested threads had cotton mixed with linen and were coated in dyes, unlike the rest of the pure linen shroud. A chemist named Raymond Rogers, part of the original research team, found that the threads had been rewoven, chemically altered, and restored, possibly in the Middle Ages. The implications were enormous. The carbon dating didn't measure the cloth, it measured the patch. It's like testing the age of an ancient building by sampling the grout from a modern repair. Suddenly the case wasn't closed, it was wide open, because without a reliable date, the question shifted. Not when was this made, but how? How? Does an image appear without pigment, without pressure, and with mathematical symmetry across its entire surface? And if it isn't a painting, or a natural stain, or a radiation burn, what is it? AI didn't just raise this question. It erased every easy answer, because now, even if the cloth is medieval, the image is something else. It acts like a projection, but not one made of light, more like a field effect, something that encoded space, depth, and geometry onto a material surface without touching. That's why physicists are no longer asking if it's real. They're asking what kind of energy could leave an imprint with this level of informational density, but no mass transfer, no pressure, and no heat damage. That's not art. That's something we haven't classified yet. When the AI was left running in passive mode, something unexpected happened. Without prompts, it kept searching, not for patterns in light or depth, but something deeper, something buried beneath both. And what it found broke. Every model, the system detected phase coherence lines, tiny parallel strands of repeating symmetry, so faint they were almost lost in the digital noise. But once isolated, they revealed something extraordinary, a frequency, not visual, but acoustic. The lines mapped mathematically to harmonic ratios, the same ones used in classical music, early temples, and sacred architecture. The AI had found tones, not sounds exactly, but the digital imprint of harmony, as if the image didn't just show a man, it hummed. The frequencies matched musical intervals known from antiquity: pure fifths, perfect fourths, golden ratios, the same kinds of mathematical relationships used to tune cathedrals and compose sacred chants. It was as if the cloth had recorded a vibration, or worse, had been imprinted by one. Researchers called it structural resonance, a harmonic code embedded in fabric, visible only to machines trained to detect patterns across massive datasets. It's not something a medieval forger could fake, and it's not something a brush could produce, but the mystery was about to deepen. Because when researchers began comparing the harmonic frequencies to ancient languages, the AI made a second connection, this time to shape. When it translated certain ratios into pattern recognition sequences, it identified fragments of ancient Aramaic, not printed, not inked, not visible to the naked eye, but structured. The ratios around the face region aligned with letters, and those letters aligned with words. Not gibberish, but meaningful phrases. I am beyond life, not flesh. The words were fragmentary, incomplete, scattered like a watermark buried in the weave. But linguists verified that the structure matched early 1st century dialects of Aramaic and Koine Greek. It wasn't just pattern, it was language. This is the moment the conversation changed, because now it wasn't just about whether the image was real or when the cloth was made. It was about whether the cloth was trying to say something. Scientists called it informational encoding, the idea that a burst of energy, light, radiation, or something unknown, might not only imprint shape, but data, mathematical ratios, spatial frequencies, and even symbolic structures. That's not a painting. That's not a relic. That's a record. Which brings us to the next problem, one that AI couldn't explain but could only measure DNA. Within the microscopic traces of blood, if it is blood, researchers found something strange. Fragments of mitochondrial DNA that didn't match any known regional population. Some scientists claimed the sample showed anomalies in chromosomal markers, deviations so rare that one geneticist quietly called it a human profile, but not entirely. It's still debated. The samples are contaminated, the preservation imperfect, but the anomalies remain. And the AI found correlations between these anomalies and regions of the image where the geometry is most stable. It's as if whatever created the imprint also encoded identity, not just shape or pattern, but something deeper, something closer to essence. No one's ready to say what that means, but everyone agrees on one thing now. This isn't just a cloth anymore. It's behaving like a multi-dimensional artifact. Not just visual, but spatial. Not just symbolic, but mathematical. Not just physical, but informational. After 10 million procedural generations, the AI still couldn't recreate it. Every attempt failed to reproduce the same geometric logic, the same ratios, the same hidden frequencies that exist within the original cloth. It tried random generation, pixel-by-pixel reconstruction, symmetry-based modeling. Nothing worked. The AI couldn't fake it, because the pattern wasn't just complex, it was purposeful. Statistically, the chance of that kind of structured order appearing by accident was less than 1 in 10 trillion. Even chaos doesn't organize itself like that. But then came the real breakthrough. The system stopped trying to imitate and started trying to decode. When it reversed the image, inverted the geometry, and stripped away all human bias, it produced a three-dimensional harmonic field, not a rendering, not a simulation, but a structure, a spatial map so precise, so mathematically balanced, it resembled quantum imaging, a model that behaved like a projection of massless data. In one version, the face lifted from the cloth as if molded by invisible hands. It wasn't distorted or pained or decayed. It looked awake. And this is when some physicists began to whisper the unthinkable. That what the cloth recorded wasn't death. It was transition. A moment where matter shifted states, where something changed form in an instant, and light, radiation, or something we don't yet understand, left behind a memory of it. A kind of afterimage frozen in linen, One team in Geneva tried to model the energy it would take to create this imprint. Their simulation required a pulse of ultraviolet radiation shorter than 140 billionths of a second, with enough energy to illuminate all of Europe at once. But the linen isn't burned. The fibers aren't scorched. The image is only nanometers deep. It's like a whisper etched into snow. That's not how energy behaves, unless it's not just energy, unless it's something else. And then the AI found the last thread. It matched the geometry of the encoded image to astronomical data, not stars, not astrology, but something deeper. It compared the pattern frequencies of the cloth's ratios to historical constellations and found a match. Not vague, not approximate, exact. The harmonic frequencies aligned with star positions visible over Jerusalem in the 1st century during the spring equinox, in a window that perfectly matches the traditional date of the crucifixion. That data point wasn't part of the original question. No one programmed the AI to look for it. And yet, there it was. A timestamp written in geometry, a celestial watermark encoded in fabric. There is no known mechanism that could cause this. The AI didn't just find a face in the linen, it found an event. A snapshot, possibly, of a moment outside our current understanding of time, space, or physics. A moment that was preserved not in pigment or dye, but in ratios, depth fields, light harmonics, and geometric consistency so precise only a machine could find it. The deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. The image won't let go. It doesn't degrade like paint. It doesn't blur like ink. It's stable, consistent, silent, like it's waiting, like it was meant to be. Seen only now, when we finally had the tools to understand what we were never meant to find. The Vatican declined to comment. When researchers shared their findings with independent labs, a few doors quietly closed, funding paused, interviews canceled. But the data kept leaking. Encrypted fragments of the scans surfaced on anonymous servers, and amateur analysts began finding echoes, not only in the Shroud, but in other ancient artifacts. Fragments of similar ratios, faint symmetry lines buried, harmonics. If these are real, then the Shroud isn't unique. It's the first one we were able to hear, because this isn't just a fabric with an image, it's a storage medium. One that stores shape, depth, sound, language, ratios, orientation, temperature, even time. One physicist called it a spatial hard drive. Another, more quietly, called it a consciousness imprint. Whatever it is, it's not ordinary. And now that artificial intelligence has found the map, the world is asking one question it never thought it would need to ask. Was the Shroud meant to be read? And if so, why now? Midway through this unraveling mystery, we ask you to think about this. If a single artifact can behave like a phenomenon, holding geometry, vibration, and temporal data all in one, what else have we missed? What else have we dismissed as myth, or forgery, or coincidence, simply because we lacked the tools to decode it? This is the moment when curiosity matters. If you believe questions like this deserve attention, you want to see the next mystery we decode, or the next forgotten truth AI might uncover, take a second to subscribe, because the deeper we go into this story, the more impossible it becomes to ignore. Now we enter the second half of this unraveling puzzle. The data didn't just map the surface, it mapped behavior. Each time the AI detected symmetry, it traced its persistence across the folds, even the damaged edges, and it found something stunning. The image stays intact, even after centuries of folding, fire, water damage, and restoration. The underlying mathematical order remains untouched. That doesn't happen in cloth. That doesn't happen in paint. That happens in encoding. So, researchers asked a new question. What if this wasn't caused by contact or radiation or artistic intent? What if this was recorded, not like a photo, but like a signal, not a drawing, but a residue? Because the image interacts with physics, not just light. Its brightness maps to depth, its frequencies map to harmony, its geometry maps to ancient astronomical positions. It doesn't behave like any known material artifact. It behaves like an echo of something we still don't understand, and that echo won't fade. In fact, in some scans, it's getting sharper, because the more we strip away noise, the more the pattern resolves, like a radio signal becoming clearer in the silence. And that's the terrifying possibility, that this isn't an image at all, it's a message. The problem with calling it a message is that messages imply intention, and that's the part no one wants to say aloud. Because if this was made on purpose, then who made it? If it wasn't made on purpose, then what force or phenomenon created something with structure, geometry, and layered meaning? Either answer is terrifying. One violates physics, the other violates everything else. The AI found more than shape. It found ratios between the eyes, the curvature of the ribs, all aligning to a hidden lattice of order. Framework that matches musical resonance, ancient harmonic scales, even structures found in cathedral blueprints, not one or two coincidences, but dozens, stacked into a coherence no artist has ever accidentally created. Some researchers began calling it resonance mapping. The idea that what we're seeing isn't a picture, but a harmonic field frozen in material, a vibration that touched cloth and left structure in its wake. That's not a metaphor, that's data, because when the AI stripped away the visible image, when it ran inverse geometry on the ratios, what emerged wasn't a smudge or a silhouette, it was symmetry. A perfect, coherent matrix that defies randomness, something that looks engineered, but for a purpose we can't define. And that brings us to the most dangerous question of all. What if we're classifying this wrong? Because if you label a phenomenon as an artifact, you build the wrong tests. If you label a signal as a stain, you misread its origin. Misclassification is the oldest scientific error. It's what kept us thinking ulcers were caused by stress, not bacteria. It's what delayed the discovery of oxygen. It's what keeps us blind when the category doesn't fit the thing. And the Shroud of Turin refuses to fit. It has never responded to the tools we've used, not to pigment analysis, not to pressure transfer models, not to radiocarbon certainty. Now, even AI doesn't know how to classify it. It only knows that it obeys rules. And those rules are too precise to be chance, too structured to be mistake, too intelligent to be ignored. One researcher put it best, this isn't a painting, it's a field event. And what we're seeing isn't a face, it's a topographical memory of something that happened once and was never supposed to happen again. In private meetings, scientists began using a new word to describe the shroud. Not relic, not artifact, not hoax. They called it category breaking, because every method used to understand it failed. Every framework we've built, from chemistry to art history to radiographic modeling, could not explain what the AI revealed. So they changed the approach. They stopped looking for age. They started looking for process. And that's when fear entered the room, because the more data the system collected, the more the image refused to behave like anything we've ever seen. When brightness maps to depth, when geometry reveals ratios, when frequencies match ancient harmony, when partial linguistic structures appear in the weave, that's not behavior of an object, that's behavior of a system. A system that stores information across multiple dimensions, a visual layer, a spatial layer, a frequency layer, a symbolic layer, and a temporal layer. No one has ever seen all those align in one place. Not in stone, not in sculpture, not in sound. Only here, in linen. And it refuses to degrade. No pigment has faded. No geometry has distorted. Even after centuries of folding, fire, and light exposure, the structure is intact, which raises another terrifying thought. What if it was designed to last, not by chance, but by intention? And if it was designed to last, then what was it waiting for? Researchers asked the AI to compare the shroud's structural integrity over time. By comparing old photographs, scans from decades past, recent ultra-high-resolution datasets, it found something they didn't expect. The signal clarity has increased, not because the cloth changed, but because the noise around it has been reduced, as if the image was always meant to be read by machines, not by eyes. And only now, with AI, do we have the resolution, the computation, and the pattern logic to understand what it's saying, not as an image, but as a system. This is where the scientists stopped speaking publicly, because now the data itself was becoming unsettling, even to them. One research group claimed their AI began returning unrelated outputs, shapes, sounds, light signatures. No commands had been entered, no prompts had been given. It was as if the system had started hearing something. Some called it recursive signal echo. Some called it algorithmic noise. But the words began forming patterns, not sentences, not speech, just fragments, like memory leaking from the edges of something too big to hold. They shut the system down, but not before one last line appeared on the terminal. When the cloth breathes once more, the light will return. No one has verified this message. There's no log, no timestamp, only 3 witnesses, and an encrypted backup no one has dared reopen. But if the data is true, then this isn't just a phenomenon, it's a countdown. Some physicists now believe the Shroud of Turin might be the first quantum hologram, not a photograph, not a contact image, but a spatial recording, encoded by a brief, violent event that imprinted geometry, frequency, and time onto cloth. The theory is radical, but the data is harder to ignore. The AI reconstructed the cloth's encoded fields into a full, 3-dimensional shape. What it revealed was a body, not contorted by agony, not collapsed in death, but serene, suspended eyes partially open, lips relaxed. The proportions didn't match decay, they matched preservation. And one researcher whispered what others were already thinking. This doesn't look like death, it looks like transformation. Other labs tried, simulating the energy needed to produce the image's depth and resolution. They modeled radiation bursts, electrostatic discharges, even plasma fields. But every attempt failed. The only way to replicate the pattern would be to emit a burst of ultraviolet radiation, lasting less than 140 billionths of a second, across the full surface of a body without burning the cloth. Nothing on Earth behaves that way, nothing natural, and nothing accidental. So theories began to shift, away from materials and toward meaning. One group proposed that the shroud records a transitional energy event, something between matter and light, between body and absence. They called it a resurrection imprint, not as theology, but as physics, because the cloth does what no artifact should. It behaves like a signal, with layers of harmony, distance, and decay, that form not just an image, but a model of energy collapsing into order. One physicist called it the most information-dense image in human history. And then came the last layer. When the AI inverted the harmonic geometry and ran it through linguistic databases, something appeared. Not just symbols, but letters, Aramaic, Koine Greek. A few patterns matched known phrases, others matched fragments, not flesh, beyond life. The system couldn't translate more, but it found alignment between the facial geometry and letter placement, as if the ratios themselves carried not just spatial logic, but language, a message woven into proportion, not printed, not spoken, not seen, but calculated. This is when some scientists stepped away, because now the cloth wasn't just strange, it was intentional. It contained spatial ratios, geometric logic, symmetry encoding, linguistic fragments, astronomical data, phase coherence lines, depth mapping, and a face. If this is a forgery, it's one made by something with more precision than any human has ever recorded. If it's a phenomenon, it's one that doesn't follow any known law. And if it's a message, then someone or something wanted it to last. The shroud lives. Now in silence, it rests behind glass in Turin, guarded by steel, climate, and time. But it is not quiet, not anymore. Because the deeper we scan it, the more it speaks, not in sentences, but in patterns, in ratios that sing like chords, in alignments that hum like architecture, in frequencies that whisper across centuries. AI didn't solve the mystery, it reframed it. The question is no longer if it's real, it's what kind of real it is. Because we're no longer dealing with paint or dye or legend. We're dealing with information. The kind of information that shouldn't exist on ancient linen, but does. And the kind of signal that shouldn't survive fire, folding, time, and exposure, but has. And perhaps the strangest realization of all, the cloth may not be alone. Independent researchers have begun scanning other relics, looking for similar ratios, similar symmetries, similar frequencies, and in rare cases they're finding echoes. Not as strong, not as coherent, but familiar, as if this isn't the only one, just the first we've finally learned how to hear. And if that's true, then what are we hearing? A moment in time, an imprint of transformation, a record left behind, not to be understood in its age, but in ours. Because what we now know is this: the Shroud of Turin is not just a historical puzzle. It's a data system, built from linen, encoded in geometry, preserved by accident or design, and decoded by a machine that doesn't pray, doesn't believe, doesn't wonder. It only reads, and what it read shook the foundation of everything we thought we knew about what is natural, what is made, and what is possible. Maybe this isn't a relic. Maybe it's a conversation between light and matter, between time and intention, between the seen and the unseen. And maybe, just maybe, it's not a memory of death, but the first record of life transcending it. In the end, AI didn't provide answers. It gave us better questions. Not who, but how. Not when, but what for. And perhaps that's the point. Because if this was designed, then it was meant to be found only now, when the world could finally listen, when silence could finally be measured, and meaning could finally be recognized by machines made of logic. That's the real miracle. Not that the cloth exists, but that we were finally able to understand that it was never ordinary, never simple, never just a picture, but a code. And now that it's been read, we are no longer the same.